Boards, other side of DevOps by Tricia. So if you're in the wrong place, now's a good time to duck out and go to other places. But thank you for coming. As you've probably seen in the previous session, these are recorded as well. So just be aware of these things. I will try and keep on top of muting people just in case. I know people accidentally forget to. That's no problem. So I'll try and keep on top of that. And as Tricia said, if you've got questions, raise your hand. If we do happen to miss them, then chuck it in chat as well. And between me and Tricia, I'm sure we can pick them up. So I've got nothing else to say other than it's over to you, and I look forward to it.
Great. Thank you, Matt. So as Matt said, this session is Azure Boards, the other side of DevOps, and it's the other side because it's the one module of DevOps, or one of the modules within DevOps that doesn't really get a lot of love. So I thought to, focus on that. Just a bit about me. So my name is Tricia Sinclair, and I am a 365 pre-sale solutions consultant from DXC Technology. I have been within the dynamic space since CRM4 all the way up through to now. I can be contacted if you've got any questions in and around Azure DevOps, Omnichannel, etc. I do tweet, I blog about this. So please feel free to follow me, ask questions, connect with me, or subscribe to my blog. This will be recorded, will be available on YouTube. That is our YouTube channel, the D365UG UK YouTube channel, and also everything else will be on the site as well. So before we actually go, can I just get a quick check as to who do we actually have in the call? So who's actually a project manager, who are developers, who are testers? So if you could just pop in your role in the chat window, just so I can know and kind of tailor the presentation a bit towards who you might actually be, that would be great. And also feel free to ask questions as we go through. I like a more interactive session. Cool. So in the agenda, what we've got is, first of all, Azure DevOps, just a brief overview. Azure DevOps is not only made up of continuous improvement development. It is actually a lot of other modules that will allow everyone to go through an entire software development life cycle in order to improve quality. So I'm going to be showing you that overview. Then we're going to dive into one of the modules, Azure Boards. And then I'm going to provide a demonstration and also go into some of the useful tools and techniques that I personally use in the session in Azure DevOps, and hopefully you'll find some use for them as well. So another thing that I want to know, and what I will ask you to do is actually just take yourself off mute and answer this. So has anyone heard of any of these products before? So from Visual Studio 2005 all the way through to DevOps Server. Have you heard of any of these or used any of them before?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. If you've used any of these, then you've actually used Azure DevOps. So we all know how Microsoft really loves to change the names of their products as they go through and improve them. And they've actually done the exact same thing to Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps started out as an on-premise solution back in the early 2000s. And the first on-premise version was Visual Studio 2005 Team System. And then as they made changes, you'll see that they changed the name until now. What we have is Azure DevOps Server for the on-prem version. Now, the first cloud-based version was Visual Studio Online. This is now known as Azure DevOps. Okay, so it's basically going to be this mostly the same features, but they've built on top of them as they went along. So if you've used any of these before, the good news is you've used Azure DevOps. Cool. So we're some way there. But before we actually go into what exactly is Azure DevOps and what are the different modules, let's go into what exactly is DevOps itself. So this term, DevOps, being the unification of people, process, and technology, is a coin that's been termed by Donovan Brown from Microsoft. And these particular terms were deliberately chosen by Donovan. So for example, where he put that it's the continuous delivery of value to customers, value was chosen over software because that's how end users will rate success. So if changes are made, for example, and it only positively affects the product team or the quality assurance team or the devs, then where's the value? So it has to basically provide positivity to the customers, right? So DevOps is also a process. It's not automating software to make things go faster. It's about people following that process. And this basically allows us to enable the product to deliver the value to stakeholders or customers. So with this in mind, the product of choice to deliver DevOps is Azure DevOps, if that makes sense. So that's actually why the name Azure DevOps, being cloud-based and also suiting that DevOps process. Okay, so DevOps itself has several different modules which actually each cater to different purposes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of these modules now, starting with Azure Boards. Now, Azure Boards is the star of this presentation, and we're going to go into this module in a lot more detail. And Azure DevOps Boards allows us to have insights into projects. So typically when I used to be in delivery and I'd worked with a product team, worked with my project team, I would work with a project manager, and a lot of the times we'd have to sit down and I'd have to explain what was going on in terms of the different risks, where we stood with the delivery, how far off we were to completion, etc. All of this information is already available in Azure DevOps, and it should be easy to look at it, report on it, and therefore save time. So instead of me having to sit down for an hour each week, it should be something that can just be pulled so everyone can actually use that time more valuably. Now, Azure DevOps Boards also allows us to have full traceability and transparency, which stakeholders really appreciate. So it's really, how can we trace the requirement all the way through from inception to build without boards in a way that inspires confidence? That's what Azure Boards really addresses. Not only that, but because stakeholders can also use the feedback tool that's also included in Boards, they can then give their 2 cents on what's being delivered. So they can then feel a part of the whole process as well. And we're going to also be demoing that underused tool later as well. Another part of the DevOps module suite is Repos, and Repos provides basically source control and collaboration. So this is basically where we can enhance the quality of the code by enabling code reviews, checking policies. We can actually make sure that the code is checked in to ensure that it's not lost. You know, if anyone actually leaves their laptops without checking their code, then that's a lot of time and a lot of work that's lost. So this is basically where all of that happens. And not only that, but Azure Repos works with the Azure Boards module to allow devs to specify which items are being worked on and which source control attributes relate to which requirements. So that's basically where we can then start on that traceability. Now, Azure Pipelines, this needs absolutely no introduction, because a lot of the times what you'll get is a lot of talk about the continuous integration, deployment, and how we can actually do that. So when you think of Azure DevOps or VSTS or TFS, a lot of the times, this is what people think about, CI/CD. But as the point of this presentation is to show that there are other areas that can be included or can be factored in and can be used for Azure DevOps. Now, with Azure Artifacts just basically enables us to create packages from local assemblies or, you know, which we can then use within the build. So if you're using anything like NuGet, if NuGet goes down, then when you try to do a build, then that's going to be unsuccessful because it's going to be looking for something that's not available. What Artifacts allows us to do is keep an offline version of that so we are not impacted. And then finally, one of my other favorite modules is the test plan module. Now with test plans, this covers a variety of different types of testing, exploratory, manual, etc. And it can also then be linked to automated tests. So that's going to provide that necessary traceability to the requirement when a defect is identified, and also to prove that that requirement has been tested. This module also has standard reports, which are really useful for stakeholders. For example, what's being tested, what has been tested, and also the pass and failure rate, etc. So overall, as you can see that with Azure DevOps, we can actually tackle the entire software development lifecycle, and this can be accomplished with that mixture of ADO modules. But the only module that's really vital for full traceability is Azure DevOps Boards. Do we have any questions so far, or are we okay? Okay, so with regards to creating the dashboard or views for the projects, Irene, I'm going to be showing you that you can create dashboards, and in fact, you can actually create default dashboards. I won't be showing you how, but I'll be able to ping you later to provide additional guidance on that. Okay, so let's continue with the demonstration. So the next bit that I'm going to talk about is, don't worry, I'm not going to be doing a lot more slides. It's basically straight in to the demonstration bit. So in this demonstration, what I'm going to be talking about is really all about how we can manage work items within Azure DevOps, all the way through from getting those requirements in to actually estimating them, planning your different phases, and also how we can track them as they go through the different stages. On top of that, how can we then report on them? So let's start off with how we can get requirements in to Azure DevOps. So what I've done is I've created a slight video that will show how one of these different ways. Now on the left, you can actually see what I've done is I've listed all the different ways in which we can get requirements or work items created into DevOps. That's all the way through from manual creation through to Power Automate integration, which will allow us to integrate it to PSA, Power Apps, and even LCS. If you were having like a joint project with FinOps, that you could actually use LCS there as well. What's actually being shown on the screen is importing the requirements in using what's known as the Team Explorer plugin. So a lot of the times we actually start with requirements from an Excel sheet, okay? So when we started from an Excel sheet, how do we actually get those requirements from the Excel sheet or user stories from the Excel sheet to DevOps? The quickest way is via the Team Explorer plugin. Because the Team Explorer plugin hooks directly into your project, what happens is we can pre-validate information that's already set up in DevOps. So for example, knowing who the assigned users or the users that are available are, that's something that we can validate to ensure that when we do push this into DevOps like we're going to do now, that it doesn't fail because it's already been pre-validated from the output. So from here, we can actually go directly to the different requirements or the different query that initiated that, that list. So here you can actually see that those requirements or that requirement has automatically now been sent to DevOps. Not only that, but if you did have like features, requirements, and tasks, you can also populate that from Excel and push it directly into ADO, and the links would actually be retained. So that is also something that you can do. Of course, now we have the new CSV import feature, but the CSV import feature does not do pre-validation. So I still think that the best way is still the Team Explorer plugin, like we've just shown here. Now, another way is, as I mentioned, using the Power Automate connector. So the Power Automate has an Azure DevOps connector, which will allow us to hook it into things like obviously PSA, which will become project operations, but really utilizing any CDS or Data Flex Pro database. On top of that, if you wanted to create a Power App to quickly create risks or issues, you can also do that as well and utilize the DevOps connector. So here what I'm doing is I've got a project inside of PSA and I'm signing the tasks to different users. And what I've done is I've created a trigger on the project that when I populate this is now going to initiate that that flow in Project Automate. And using the that connector, it's now going to push all that information similar to what we did with Team Explorer we can then get everything into Azure DevOps. Okay, so if I just do a refresh, you'll see that all the information has been populated. Not only that, but the links have also been created as expected. Okay. So if I show here that the links have actually been created. Perfect. So here you can actually see the related work is the related work that was assigned to the task inside of PSA. So the next thing that I'm going to show is here. So now that we've got all our requirements inside, what we'll need to do is try to plan our work. Okay, so when we're planning our work, we can do this in a variety of ways. One of the ways is utilizing the backlog view. Now in the backlog view, you'll see that you have the full list of the requirements and the tasks that you've created. And what I want to do is I want to highlight the order here, because what you can do is utilize what's known as the order to specify what's most important to your organization. And when you specify what's most important, if you at a high level from, for example, the requirement or the user story, specify how big or what you consider to be the sizing of that requirement, we can then utilize what's known as the forecast, the velocity. So the velocity really just tells you how much work do you think that your team will be able to accomplish in a particular phase or a particular sprint. Now, this is, it's really down to your methodology. So obviously you have waterfall, agile, scrum, etc. And Azure DevOps does actually have different, what you'd call default processes to adhere to these different types of methodologies. But a lot of the times what tends to happen is projects adhere to what's known as Wagile. And therefore you might have your own way of actually sizing things and setting things up. But if you utilize the velocity, what you'll then be able to do is use Azure DevOps to identify what you can accomplish within that within a particular phase. So for example, because this velocity is 16 and because the ordering, you'll see that the actual forecasting line stops at phase 1. So this is what we can get accomplished in phase 1. If we had more and this was perhaps 2, then we could possibly accomplish everything here in phase 1. Okay, not only that, but what we also have is the concept of roll-up columns. So in previous versions of Azure DevOps or TFS, etc., if you were using those, one of the main problems was we couldn't easily see the remaining work rolled up to the feature level or the requirement level. However, now what we have is the concept of a roll-up column. That roll-up column we can actually use from a quick list, so where we can actually see the counts, etc. And this is already set for you. Or we can see things in terms of a progress bar to see how much work have we actually done on a particular requirement or task. So for example, I have put the sum of the remaining work, so 42 hours, and you'll see the 42 hours is actually an amalgamation of all the different remaining works for the tasks associated to my requirement. The remaining work is not aligned to the sizing. So you obviously have different sizings, such as like t-shirt sizes, but Azure DevOps does numerical sizing. So you've actually just got to factor that in. Another thing as well, once you've actually identified where you want things to go in terms of the forecasting and the sizing, what you can then do is basically just drag and drop things into the different phases that you have. So if I wanted to, I could actually just drag and drop this into my next sprint. And you can actually see that that's there with all my different tasks. So it's really just a quick way of planning the work for your current or future phases or sprints. So if I move on, the next thing after you've planned your work, another way of doing is really your sprint board. So if you know now what you actually want to get done in each phase, the next thing that you might want to do is assign work to people. So how do you assign work to people? First of all, you might need to understand their capacity. How much teamwork, how much time do you have assigned to each person? What can they actually get done? So to do this, what we do is we set something up called a capacity. Now, in a capacity, what we can do is we can specify the different days off that people will have within a particular time period, particular phase, and that will tell us how much time they've got left overall, assuming that people are running an 8-hour day. You also got the capacity per day. So this is basically saying how much hours per day will this person get accomplished, and that's based on the discipline. Now the discipline is the type of task that they'll need to do. So previously, again, the discipline was not customizable, but now it is. So you can add additional disciplines, for example, documentation, etc., if you wanted to. And on top of that, you can also add additional disciplines to each person. So for example, if myself was doing both analysis and development, then I could actually have got 4 hours per day for analysis, 2 hours per day for development. Something to note, capacity does not do well with half days. It only really does full days, unless you're going to include decimals. So treat the capacity not as gospel, but as a guide. Okay, because that capacity, if it's set up, will really allow us to get an overview of the amount of hours our team has assigned for within this within the phase. But as the time goes on, it actually adjusts as well. Okay, on top of that, as you can see, it's also broken down by the disciplines, and then on top of that, by each person, each user. So if we're assigning work to the different users and they've got too much work on, then this is a good it's a good place to go. It will just basically tell you straight off that this person is oversubscribed or this person can actually get more work to do. Okay, so it's actually really good for that. Now, if we move on, once we've assigned the work to people, we're assuming that they're going to now move on and actually get started with, delivery. How do we actually track the delivery, when you have your meetings, etc.? Then what we can do is we can utilize what's known as the Kanban board. Now, this Kanban board has been customized because you can customize the Kanban board. So we have the cards, which basically show us what's the different requirements and the different stages that they are in. We can customize it to show the different fields, the additional fields that we want to show. So I've customized it because I want to see what the scope is and what's proposed. On top of that, if I want to highlight anything or draw anything to my attention, I can basically color code it. So for example, here, I want to basically see any cards, highlight any cards which are not in scope. So I know that this should not be worked on, because it might be that we're identifying if it should be placed in scope or not, so we're preempting, but we don't want it to work on it, so we've highlighted it. Not only that, but what I've also done is I've basically grouped things together. So this is basically work that's in progress, but it's okay, it's standard. But if I wanted to, I can also highlight requirements that are high priority. Not only high priority, but you can specify what the board should show in terms of the grid lines. So you can actually say if it's high priority or if it's additional information required, and you can drag the card into the appropriate sections. From this card, you'll notice that I am able to see at a glance the different tasks, and from here mark them off as complete or even add them. I can also modify bugs, for example, if I'm in testing, or even create different test cases from here, and also from here run test cases and etc. As I'm going through, in delivery, you have what's known as the definition of done. What does it actually mean that a requirement has accomplished or passed a particular stage? That's something that should be agreed, obviously pre-delivery, but if you wanted to note it, then what you could do is make sure that it's also documented and displayed inside of Azure DevOps as well. So for example, in order for a requirement to move past the active stage for me, then the development must be completed, the test cases must be completed, unit tests also created, and the build and create and release created as well. Okay, so it's really allowing all the developers and the business analysts and everyone really to ensure that they are adhering to the agreed definition of done. Again, improving quality. Now, obviously, to ensure that we are not overworking the team and that we have a good pace, one of the things we can do is specify how many items we want the team to be working on at any one point. How many work items should be in a particular stage? And that's basically how we have the work in progress limit. So here I have that we should actually have 3 items at a time that we're actively working on. However, we have 6 in this instance. So it's going to highlight it to say, listen, we might be a bit maxed out. We don't want to take anything else in a proposed state until we get some of this work done. And also in resolved, because we have a little bit more flexibility there, we can specify it as, 5. So it will just basically say how many items we're currently working on. Okay, but here you can actually just drag and drop to the different sections like before. Any questions so far? Are we good to go?
Yeah, you're good. Yeah, you're good.
Cool. Okay, so once we've actually, as we're running through, another thing as well is we might want to request feedback from our stakeholder. So if we're going to request feedback, what we can do is from within the requirement itself, we can actually click on request feedback. This in previous versions used to be on the dashboard itself only, on one of the widgets, but in a recent release, they have actually now enabled us to request feedback per individual item as opposed to a group of items only. So here I can basically just put my email address. And by the way, it has to be, the stakeholders must exist inside of Azure DevOps in order for this to work. But if I send through the instructions like please log in to CRM and test, although it's not called CRM anymore, but that's fine. And I click preview, you'll see this is basically an example of the email that will actually be sent out to the stakeholders. Okay. What happens when they actually click on that email? And this is where I did not load that up yet. 1 second, let me just bring that up now. Well, what's going to happen is they will get an email that looks like this. Okay, so again, similar to the preview, that we had before. So if I click on the provide feedback button, it will take them to a URL. If they don't have what's known as the test and feedback extension, they'll be prompted to install it. But as you can see, it's highlighting here for me and blinking because that's where we need to go. So you'll see that the requirement that we're testing is requirement number 18. You have the description of the requirement and also what we're actually being asked to do. The instructions are in the email. So it's already started to record my screen. So all I need to do is start testing. So if I go to Google, for example, I type in D365 user group. This is an example of things to test, and I click on United Kingdom. What's actually happening is it's making a note of the different clicks that I am making, and it's recording each of them. So if anyone's aware of the RPA tool, this is like a previous example of what that would have looked like, but it's effectively doing a very similar thing. So if I wanted to, I could, for example, create a test case retrospectively. And when I'm creating a test case, you'll see what it was actually doing is it's actually checking to see what I've done. Now, I can obviously date the action and also exclude different steps if I wanted to. This will then create a test case and assign and associate it to the requirement. Okay. If I wanted to also, I can add notes, and also I can take pictures as well. And also, if for things that might be intermittent, it sometimes works, it sometimes doesn't, I can record my screen and audio if I wanted to. So I can talk people through it. But I can also create bugs and different tasks that I think that might need to be accomplished or might need to be done. Okay, so these are different things that I can do with the feedback client. What will happen is this now feeds into Azure test plan. So if I create a bug, what will happen is a bug will be created and assigned to the requirements, but it's visible inside of test plans, not inside of Azure Boards. Okay, the task will actually be assigned to the requirement, but will be in Azure Boards. So I'm just going to close that off and continue. Any questions on the feedback tool? It's not something that's commonly used, but it's something that I think should be. Okay, so what we then have is the ability to create queries. So if you wanted to group things together to identify or even just mass or bulk update items, what you can utilize is shared queries. Now I compare shared queries to like the advanced find feature inside of Azure DevOps feature I compare this to D365 advanced find. Okay, so this basically allows us to specify the different criteria that we want to search for. But not only that, we can then run charts based on the results that we have. So here, because I actually am a member of these two projects, I can actually run a query that is across the two different projects. Okay. Now, because I can run that query, I can also share the query with other users of the team, and I can also include the different queries and the charts on dashboards if I wanted to. Okay, so after that, so another thing as well is, I think I talked about that one already. Okay, so I talked about the feedback, and what I have this is basically just to show the different sessions of feedback runs that you can actually see, which bugs have been assigned and how they've been triaged. As you can see, it is in test plans. So you would need access to test plans in order to see this. However, feedback, you don't need the test plans feature in order to utilize it, if that makes sense. It's just if you were going to create bugs and actually to see the sessions, etc., you'll need access to test plans.
Sorry, Scott's got a question which I think is around that. So what sort of license do you need to use feedback?
You don't actually need a license for feedback. So feedback is for stakeholders. So stakeholders don't need a license for Azure DevOps. They'll just need to be assigned a stakeholder role. And it's really the purpose behind it, as you can see, is really to get them engaged in the project. So there is no license actually needed. You will need a license, though, if you were going to handle the bugs and the defects inside of test plans. Right? But you can actually just get it created as a work item and just manage it from inside of boards. Cool. Perfect. So if we wanted to now, as within a project, you have people coming and you have people going, you've got different stakeholders, and it's kind of important to make sure that everyone's on the same page. One of the ways in which you can do that is by utilizing what you call wikis. So when you create a wiki, you can actually pull in the different cards, which gives you an overview of who's actually, where the states in which you are with that board, or with that different phase rather. You can also have queries embedded in the wiki as well. So I've actually created two types of wikis. One to give a status overview of where we are with the project itself, and another to give an overview of what exactly we're building, because obviously as a wiki, it is really serving the purpose of whatever you need as a project team. But within the wiki, you can actually mention people. You can also mention requirements, and also one of the features that are currently being built out is having a checklist. So for example, if you wanted to have a deployment checklist, you can do that as well. Okay. Now I talked about also having a wiki as an explanation as to what was being built, and I think this is a very good way of using the wiki. It's just really just giving that overview of this is basically the purpose and this is the process, the full process of what should actually happen. And the beauty behind this is because the wiki can actually be linked to different work items. So if you have a tester or a developer that needs to understand what they're building, then you can link it to the work item. So if they actually went, if they were on the work item, they could actually just go to the wiki and actually see where that piece that they're building, how it fits into the bigger picture. Okay. Cool. Any questions so far, or we'll move on to dashboards and analytic views?
One about Wikis, Microsoft version, Confluence. Confluence is.
Not sure. I've not heard of Confluence. But Scott, I can actually have a look, and I'll reach up to you later with Rain's question with regards to dashboards. Cool. So with dashboards you have as a standard, you do have standard dashboards, but you also have dashboards that you can also create utilizing Power BI. What we now have is the ability to utilize what's known as analytics views. And analytics views is still in preview, yes, but this is basically where you'll need to go to get your to be able to create dashboards inside of Power BI utilizing the data from within Azure DevOps. So when you spin up a new DevOps, Azure DevOps Teams, and you enable preview, you'll get this analytics view here. And as you can see, it has pretty much the standard shared views, which you can actually tweak if you wanted to. Okay, so some of this is really useful because it not only gives you the insights as to the information that you have at this standard point in time, but one of the things that you have as you actually build out a work item, you're updating the history, you're basically specifying, you're building, you're fleshing things out, and that all appears in the history tab against a particular requirement or a work item. That information is not lost. You can actually also get access to that history inside of these views as well, and then also pull them out inside of Power BI. So I do find that pretty useful. But in the end, what you can actually build inside of DevOps and link it, just like you have dashboards inside of 365. You can also have the similar concept inside of Azure DevOps, where you build a dashboard and you associate it to a particular security role or a team. And that way, everyone is seeing the information that they need when they need it. So, you know, in the previous, what I explained was about kind of getting time back from your project manager, because you have to explain every single thing that's going on with the project. Then with dashboards, you shouldn't need to, and with reports, you shouldn't need to, because you're pulling information directly from here. But this does require, as I mentioned, DevOps is a process. So you've got to buy into the process. Similar to when we tell people for CRM, you've got to buy into that CRM process. You've got to buy into the DevOps process. Otherwise, the data won't be there and you won't be able to pull the reports, which means that you're still going to have to be manually telling people what's going on with the project at all times. Okay, but from here, you can actually have standard widgets and also create your own widgets as well, utilizing Markdown, etc. Okay, I think, a second, let's just have a run through as to what we went through. Okay, so I'm just going to do a recap. Unless there are any questions, what I'll do is I'll do a recap of everything that we went through and how it all ties together. Any questions?
I think you're good for now.
Okay, great. So just going to go through the different features of DevOps that we ran through and kind of just reiterate some of the key points there. So we went through work items, and we went through work items because this is the main way in which we're able to track the features and the requirements that are being developed. So that also includes like your code, your defects. These are all actually work items in the system. Okay, so we showed how we can get work items from requirements, etc., inside of DevOps. The main way, of course, is actually to use Team Explorer. It's one of the main ways in which you can get it in. But alternatively, if you're utilizing another system, you can use, you know, the Azure DevOps connector using for Project Power Automate. There are also APIs if you wanted to do a bespoke integration as well. There are APIs are available for Azure DevOps, which you can utilize. We also then talked about boards. So with boards, the main board which we showed was the Kanban board, and this basically allows us to collaborate with each other with others by adding and updating and reviewing the work items as cards. So we showed how we could utilize the color coding and the work in progress limit, and also the definition of done, which is quite key, because in my experience, when I worked in delivery, it was always a question as to, is this actually done? Because obviously developers think, okay, that's done, but that doesn't mean because they're done that everyone is done. We need to all have that full understanding of what exactly done means. We also showed the horizontal swim lanes to be able to segregate the different data to show either priority or importance. And also we showed how we could easily and quickly manage your different tasks, tests, and bugs directly from within those cards. With backlogs, we showed how we could plan our work based upon the size of requirements, and also we showed how we can just drag and drop in order to push requirements into a different phase or sprint, etc. And not only that, but one of the really cool newer features that was only released earlier this year, which seems so long ago, is the roll-up features. So being able to show the count off, show the sum of the summary and the remaining work items, or the sum of the completed work items. You can actually do that now. Not only that, but you can create your own custom roll-up fields and also custom bar fields as well. And we also talked about queries and how we can utilize queries basically in a similar way to advanced find. So we can actually create a criteria-based query that we can then use to export to Excel. We can use to show on a dashboard or even on a wiki, etc. Okay. And also we showed the feedback tool, which is actually one of the most underused tool inside of Azure DevOps. And the feedback tool is basically just to request feedback from stakeholders to allow that feedback response to then be recreated within DevOps. Now, I demonstrated the web-based feedback tool. However, there is also a feedback tool that can be installed as well. That's more for your longer running projects, I guess, because it has a lot more flexibility. Not only is the feedback tool really useful for solicited feedback, so if you wanted to get the feedback, you can actually do what I showed. But if you had a stakeholder that wanted to give unsolicited feedback, they could actually fire up that test and feedback extension or the feedback client, and that response would also be created as a feedback response inside of Azure DevOps. And that could then be triaged, not be identified as either a change or a bug or, you know, something for you to be aware of. The other thing that we looked at was how we can manage capacity. So how could we identify if someone was oversubscribed with work, or if they had some flexibility that they could take on additional work. Just basically remember, the capacity does not do half days, so you'd have to use decimals to kind of tweak that, and it should be used as a guide, not as gospel. Okay. So with all of that, what we've been able to do is actually utilize all these different features that will basically allow us to utilize Azure Boards as a way to provide that traceability, transparency, and quality that your stakeholders will be expecting from your project. Now, what I demonstrated to you today was utilizing the CMMI process. That process is more geared towards the waterfall methodology, but there are other processes. So for example, you've got the Scrum process, which more adheres to your Scrum methodology, Agile, which is more geared towards your Agile planning methods, which is, you know, including Scrum. CMMI, as I mentioned, is waterfall, and basic, which is really just really basic. It's not tied to any methodology. It's just really to do, doing, and done. Now, each of these processes have different types of work items and also have different types of processes. If you wanted a more in-depth look into what each of these processes have, what I would do is I'll at this point include a shameless plug-in to my blog, because I've actually done a detailed run through of what each of these processes include and what the differences between them are. Okay, and this is really good to understand if you wanted to tweak them, because you can create your own custom process. I would recommend, before creating your own custom process, to understand what the standard process would provide you, so you'll know which one you needed to start off with to change it to create your own custom one instead. Now, I have talked a lot, and in the session, what I've done is I've kind of gone through and utilized a lot of different tools and extensions. So what I've done is I've grouped them all together. It's a little bit small, but what I can do is I can share this slide if you want. This slide will be shared on the user group, so you'll actually get access to these links. But with this, you can actually build out Azure DevOps and integrate it into your other processes. For example, if you're utilizing Slack or Teams, there is actually a link to utilize that. You've also got the analytics. So if you're using an older version and not in the preview for Azure DevOps, that's where you'll need to go to get the analytics views to extend it for Power BI. Delivery plans is really useful for if you were having a cross-functional team and you wanted to understand where the impact will be for those teams. That's basically where delivery plan really comes into use. And some of these are based on, it's kind of like an ISV in Dynamics, where you've got an independent solution vendor. They basically extend the standard product to provide it with functionality that the standard product might not have. And that's pretty much what some of this is. So for example, the sprint drop plan and the retrospective and the work item visualizer have been created because for sprint drop plan, it's basically being able to modify and run your sprints from within DevOps in a different way, look and feel. Retrospective, if you're in an agile project, you can run retrospective, remote retrospectives at that from within DevOps. And also with work item visualizer, one of the drawbacks, of course, is how can you actually see the different work items that are linked to each other? Because you can have a work item that's a predecessor of one and a work item that's a child of another, but it's not easy to see how they relate, and that's what work item visualizer does. If you're running a remote team and you wanted help with estimation, how do you do that? Well, the estimate tool actually allows you to do remote estimations into Azure DevOps, and it will pre-populate it based on the agreed estimate that's been agreed, if that makes sense. It uses the Fibonacci sequence in the planning poker cards. And you've also got Power Automate. So we talked about the Azure DevOps connector. So that's where you'll be able to find that. And the feedback client that I talked about, if you wanted to download it, that's also available. And the Team Explorer that will allow you to export or import work items to and from Excel. The Team Explorer, depending on the version of projects, you will also be able to import and export with project as well, but it depends on your version of projects. It's not going to be available in the newest release of projects. Now, are there any questions?
There's two if we have time. Conscious people might need to move on. So take offline if needed. One was an earlier one from Ollie. DevOps team set up. Any recommendations in terms of backlogs and boards?
I need a bit more information on that question. What? Do you have a specific?
Yeah, I guess Ollie, if you want to reach out, and we can dig in. I don't know why I'm echoing. I can hear it as well, Scott. I'm trying to work through my own echo. There we go. Dodgy cable. Yeah, so Ollie, if you want to reach out and let us know a bit more. Scott's question was, how would you approach restricting access to create or updating work item types at different stages? For example, only nominated people to move items from backlog into another column.
Yeah, so you can do that with security roles. So with security roles, what you can actually do is there are two things. You need to create a custom state workflow, and you also need to use security roles as well. But that is possible. Cool. Now, in the newest release, the newest release, because Azure DevOps releases updates very regularly, actually a lot more regularly than D365. And in the release from a month ago or 2 months ago, they have made changes to the ability to create your own custom process. So what used to happen is you were able to create additional states, but you couldn't modify the state reasons, but that's now changed. Which with each state, what you'll need to then do is actually associate, if you have a particular field, you can actually tie that down to a particular role. So it's really config that you will need to do, but it is possible. I hope that answered the question. Are there any other questions or?
I think Ollie's extending his a bit, so I think for the purposes of time, I have to move that offline because people need to shift across to their next sessions. If that's okay, Ollie. I've pasted the session links for the next 3 sessions on into the chat, just for people's ease if they want to move to those ones.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for attending my session today. As I mentioned, if you wanted to ask any additional questions, just reach out to me. These are my details, and I'm really happy to just have a discussion about your setup or any additional questions about anything that you had in today's topic.
Yeah,